Morning, everyone. For Hello to those of you that I met yesterday, and to those of you that I haven't yet met. My name is Hannah Sylvester. I'm a medical herbalist and herbal medicine degree lecturer from Lincoln. And it's really lovely to see so many of you here this morning. Thanks so much for joining us on I don't know how it is where you are, but it's certainly blustery up here in Lincolnshire. So what I wanted to share with you today is, as well as the really wonderful benefits that trees have for our environment and our wildlife, and our mental health, of course, I wanted to sort of bring some light to the fact that trees can also be used as a form of medicine for our physical health too. And some of you might already be aware of some of the trees that are used for medicines in the conventional prescribed sense. So, for example, we've got aspirin, which is derived from the bark of the white willow tree, and we've got many of the Taxol based chemotherapy drugs that are derived from Taxus brevifolia, the Pacific yew. So modern medicine draws a lot from trees for its health, for things that we can aid for our health. But this morning, I wanted to share with you just a little bit of enlightenment about how the elder tree, how Sambucus nigra, can safely heal and support the human body as medicine. So that during the upcoming spring and sort of late spring, summer and autumn months, you can start to make your own elder remedies to help to support your own health, and also to help you to bring you a little bit closer to another of our highly prolific, very beautiful, and I think quite underappreciated trees. So the elder tree, Sambucus nigra, well, it's absolutely steeped in history. And what I would like you to do in the chat box, because there is so much regional information out there about the folklore and about the elder tree, it would be really lovely if you could share any aspects that you're aware of while I'm talking through this, because within the short time we've got together, there's no way I can cover absolutely everything, because there are quite literally hundreds of stories about the elder tree, but I thought I'd share with you some of the more common ones. So in terms of one of the more common aspects of elder folklore, many people are aware of the fact that it's often considered rather unlucky to cut down an elder tree or an elder bush, unless, of course, you ask the permission of, and this is where it varies around the country. In some parts of the country, it's said that you need to ask the druids. In other parts of the country, it's said that you need to ask a particular historic figure. But one of the more common ones, and particularly around mainland Europe, is that you should ask the permission of the elder mother or the elder moor first. So just a little hint for you there, just in case you need to chop down an elder tree this summer. And in East Anglia, so around Norfolk and Suffolk, it's considered very unlucky to burn the branches. And in Devon, more specifically, burning was prohibited because it was felt that that might bring about an endangerment to life of sheep. So all these little, quite curious, little sort of tidbits from around the country of elder being steeped in history. And it's thought that a lot of these sort of more negative stories and beliefs about the elder tree sort of started in pre-Christian times, but certainly by the Middle Ages, it was starting to gain a little bit of a sinister reputation, because it was thought and believed that the crucifix in the Bible stories were made from elderwood. And then there was also another belief that the elder tree was actually the tree that was hung himself from. So you can see where sort of these negative connotations kind of come in. However, there are some quite positive associations with history too, which is good. So universally, throughout a great deal of the folklore, it's also seen as having protective powers too. And it was seen as a tree that would be safe to shelter underneath in a storm because it would never be struck by lightning. Now, how true that is, I have no clue. But obviously we need to take care out in the storms and the lightning. But it's a curious thought. And it was also thought that the earth from around the roots was thought to have a special power to relieve toothache. Again, we don't quite know where that one came from, and I certainly wouldn't recommend people grabbing handfuls of soil and having a chew, but it's another one to ponder on. So it's, as a tree, when you approach an elder tree, particularly when it's in flower, it's one that some people struggle with, because some people really find the smell quite challenging. So it has quite an unpleasant bitter smell. It's certainly very distinctive. And you'll often find that wild animals and insects will try to avoid it, really. So one thing that I have been known to happen is that sometimes those people who ride horses have been known to put sprigs of the elder in the bridle of their horses when they're riding them, to try and keep the flies away when they're riding, and apparently that does work. So on to the medicinal aspects. Now, we are really very, very lucky with elder, because it is a medicine for all times of the year. And at this time of the year, when it's just starting to come into flower in some of the warmer parts of the country, it's there for one particular purpose, right the way through the season where it is in sort of growing flowers and also developing into the berry. The leaves have a purpose. And then moving into the late summer and autumn months, the berry has a purpose. And as you'll see in a little while, every single part of that tree has a really good sound use that can help us with our health. Before I share that with you, I just wanted to share this picture that I took of some elderberry stems a few years ago. And for those of you that were able to join in with the Hawthorn session yesterday, I'm quite interested in the appearance of how our medicinal plants and how our medicinal trees look. And particularly when you relate it back to the old doctrine of signatures, it was said that how a plant or a tree appeared in the world was said to how it would signify its potential use for the human body. Now, admittedly, I have kind of cheated with this because I've put several of the stems together. But personally, I really think that it's very, very synonymous with the respiratory tract. So in particular, the sort of, the bronchial tree, and then even going down to the little sort of air sacs at the end, the alveoli, to me, that's kind of the elderberries. So it's another one where we can certainly look towards nature and try to get a good hint as to what it may be used for. So it's always been regarded as essentially as an upper respiratory medicine for our immune systems, but particularly the respiratory system. And in the spring and the summer, we make medicines from the flowers, and right through to the autumn when we make medicines from the berries, it still has this respiratory, particularly upper respiratory focus. So on to the medicinal uses of the flowers. Now, depending on where you are in the country or world at the moment will depend on what stage they're at. Here around me in Lincolnshire, we're not quite in flowering season yet. I'd say we're probably about another week away. Although that said, if you are perhaps in a more sheltered part, you might find they come out slightly earlier. Where I'm situated is sort of quite a windy part of the county and quite chilly, really. So the flowers are yet to make an appearance. I'm very, very much looking forward to when they do. So as an overreaching kind of feature of the flowers, where they really come into play is in dealing with really chronic, really yucky, horrible respiratory catarrh. So where you'll find the flower particularly useful is making an infusion from the flowers, and I've got one here with me that I can show you in a little while. And sipping a warm to hot infusion of the flowers when you start to feel a cold coming along. And what it will do, it will start to have an anti-catarrhal effect and help to reduce that level of catarrh. So you might use it for colds. You can also use it for laryngitis and tonsillitis to a point as well, and also for any seasonal flus. So in that respect, that's its main use that you're going to find. But for those people where the cough goes down a little further, it can relieve bronchial congestion too, and particularly if you've got a really tight cough that's, you know, really kind of stuck and just uncomfortable, it can be really helpful for that too. So this is where we sort of see it come into play, and where we see it as a really valuable seasonal medicine, because for people who experience symptoms of hay fever, it can be used as a really beautiful remedy in combination with perhaps some other things that might help to relieve the inflammatory and immune response as well. So things like, going a little bit off topic here, but nettle and also ribwort plantain as well. The three of those together in a tea for hay fever really work really quite well. And particularly if you get sort of quite stuck sinusitis with it as well, it's a good one to try. But it's not just the upper respiratory tract that it has a use for. It can also be used for certain digestive conditions as well. So it has a kind of antispasmodic, so spasm relieving action, and an astringing action on the gut as well. So where you might be able to use the flowers as well are for indigestion and kind of winds, that sort of gripey, colicky nature that you get with those. I would just urge a tiny bit of caution, and I'll repeat this when we come to the berries, because some people find it a little bit stimulating for the bowel. So if you find you have a very sensitive bowel, start with sort of lower amounts of the tea and see how far you can go with it. And it also historically, and perhaps one of the sort of more common historical aspects is that it's always had a use for our urinary health as well. So the flowers themselves are diuretics, so they enhance kidney function. And by doing so, they can help relieve fluid retention as well. And one final point I'll say about the flowers, just for now, is that linked in with that sort of upper respiratory use, if you make a tea or an infusion from the flowers, and then you let it cool slightly, so cool enough to drink and not cause, you know, any sensation of burning. What you can do is you can use that as a gargle if you feel that you have a sore throat. And you can also use it quite effectively as a mouthwash, as a mouth rinse, particularly if you experience mouth ulcers, because the chemical constituents that it contains, its particularly sort of astringent nature, really lend itself to healing the oral mucosa. So it's a flower of many wonderful uses. And the leaf perhaps isn't quite so well known. So the leaf, once you're aware of what an elder tree looks like, you'll quite often see it when you're out and about on your walks, because obviously it's a tree, but it is also quite a prolific bush as well. And where the leaf can come into play, particularly at this time of year, is for insect bites. So if you're out and about on a walk, wherever you are, and you get bitten by something pesky and annoying, then all you need to do is pick a leaf or two, scrunch them between your fingers, and then directly rub the leaf onto the part of the skin that's been bitten. So you're releasing the juices from the leaf onto the skin, and that will help to take down some of the irritation and the inflammation that you get from your from the insect bites. Obviously, if it's a sting, it's not going to be appropriate for that, because that's just going to push the sting in further. But if it's a bite, and you know, we all know what it feels like to be bitten at this time of year, it's pretty horrid. But it's one to certainly try and certainly use. But if you want to make a preparation that's going to last through the season, and one that you can, you know, either have in your home medicine chest, or have in having your kitchen cupboard, or pop in your bag to take around with you, you can make a really easy salve or ointment from the elder leaf by infusing the elder leaf in oil, and I'll come on to this a little bit later, and then combining your infused oil with some either beeswax or vegan substitute wax, and then making a ointment that you can essentially use all year round as long as it keeps. And helpfully, because of some of the constituents that it shares with the hawthorn tree, it does also have a really good action in helping to relieve and take down bruises and sprains. So you can use it as a bruise ointment too. Now, we're not quite there at this point this year. We've got another few months to go until all the lovely flowers turn into berries. But I think it's fairly well known that the elderberry is a really, truly wonderful aid for our health during the colder months of the year. And again, it comes into play with our respiratory health too. So what the berries are particularly good for is helping to regulate the immune response. And where the research has found that they're particularly helpful is in inhibiting the common cold and also the influenza virus. So where you'll find they're coming particularly useful is at the onset of any cold or flu. And that will help to shorten the duration of any flu symptoms that start to appear. But also it's worth mentioning that the other mechanism by which elder works is that particularly the flowers, but also the berries, they have a diaphoretic action. And what that means is that they're able to stimulate the circulation and almost cleanse the body by bringing out a temperature. So many of our modern day medicines help to kind of quash a temperature if we have, you know, the cold or flu. And if you were to bring out a temperature, then that is generally a more healthy response, obviously taking into account what the healthy degrees of a temperature are. But that's where it really, really comes into play. And for the berry in particular, it's a really lovely, beautiful tasting medicine. And you make syrups and glycerites and elderberry rob and elderberry cordial, and all of these preparations will have a benefit for helping prophylactically, but also to help to reduce the severity of those symptoms and shorten it. Something else I'll say about the berries as well, which is quite underappreciated really, because it's easy just to get stuck on one idea of how a plant can be used medicinally, but elderberries also have a really good use for our circulation as well. And the anthocyanins have a really great use for protecting our blood vessel wall. So that again is going back to its use in bruising. So what it can do within the body is that can be used to help prevent vascular disease and particularly help to prevent atherosclerosis. It has a role to play in cholesterol regulation. And the berries also have a really useful use in helping to, it's sort of almost like a sort of a collagen stabilizing action. So for people that experience varicose veins and hemorrhoids, it can have a really, really valuable part to play there. Now, on to the really interesting stuff, how to make your medicines from elder. This isn't my cat. Quite often you'll find when you're out foraging and out looking for things that that you'll notice all sorts of different creatures. And I don't know whose this cat was, but it was particularly taken with the fact that I was harvesting elderberries that day. So just to revisit some of the actions of the elder that we've been talking about, it's anti-catarrhal, it's diaphoretic, so it can help to, excuse me, bring out a sweat. It's astringing and drying. It's immune enhancing, and to a certain degree, it's also anti-inflammatory as well. And like all medicinal plants and trees, it has a quality to it. And its medicinal qualities are seen as heating and warming, but also very dispersing. So dispersing heat, whilst also being quite drying, but also bitter and quite sweet. And emotionally, it certainly has a place as particularly the flower, as a relaxant and as a calming medicinal aid, and really quite soothing for tension and anxiety. As you'll note from the little picture there of my elderberry foraging in the bucket, you'll see I've picked the stems there. And what I would say is that the whole tree contains cyanogenic glycosides. So from a safety point, what you need to do when you're making your elderberry medicines is to detach the berries from the stalks, and also detach ideally as much of the stalk as you can from your elder flowers. And also because when you're picking elderberries, you'll notice from that picture there, you get a few green ones pop in there as well. So dispose of any of the really green berries, because what they will do is they have the action of converting to cyanide within the body. And obviously that's not going to be good for your health. But more importantly, what that will do is it will increase the chances of you getting digestive irritation from it. And you might find that if you make a preparation with lots of the stalk and also the raw seeds from the berries, is that you might find that it has a nauseous effect and it might make you vomit. So destem your elder, and when you're making the medicine from the berries, squeeze out the juice from the elderberries so that the stalk, any remainder stalks and the seeds are left in whatever you're straining it through. So just a little point there. But I will just also mention that obviously it's not just us that need the elderberries, it's all our wildlife and our birds as well. So always ensure to kind of stick to this kind of unwritten rules of foraging, really, that try to only use and pick what you need, but also make sure that ideally you only pick about 10% of what's already on the tree or on the area that you're picking from. But the other thing to bear in mind as well is that someone else might have been there before you. So just be mindful of the fact that, you know, we need to keep some from our birds and our wildlife, not just the berries, but also in the spring as well, because when we pick the flowers in the springtime, as they're just coming out now, when we pick those flowers, they're not going to turn into the berries in the autumn as well. Okay, so on to a little bit about how to make the remedies. Now, what I've got here are 3 just little short videos of how I make my elderberry syrup. Now, this is looking forward a bit to the autumn here. Unfortunately, I don't actually have any videos of me making any elderflower preparations, but we'll talk about that in a minute when we're off the slideshow. So to make your elderberry syrup, what you need is your de-stalked elderberries. And your best friend with de-stalking elderberries is a fork. You slide your fork in between the bracts and you push off the berries into a bowl. And then it gets kind of quite interesting, because then what you realise is that it's really quite easy to turn your entire kitchen completely purple. And it's also quite interesting to watch the amount of berries that pop off all over the place and disappear behind nooks and crannies in your kitchen that you never knew existed. So when you're making elderberry syrup, never wear anything that you don't want to turn purple. Be mindful of the fact that your hands are going to turn really very purple. And also, if you're using a kitchen work surface, you're going to have to go round afterwards and pick up some of the spare elderberries that have dropped all over the place, because you can be as neat and as carefully considered as you like. There are always going to be ones that jump off and disappear. So you've got your elderberries and you pop them in a pan. Give them a little bit of a wash first, a little bit of a rinse first, just to rinse off any bugs. And pop them in a pan, put a little bit of water in the bottom of the pan, and then pop the lid on and simmer them on a very, very low heat for about an hour is usually long enough. After an hour, you'll see this beautiful, gorgeous purple liquid start to appear. And what you do then is, after that hour, just leave it to cool for a little bit, just to reduce the risk of you scalding your hands. But then pour your elderberry liquid mix, and you can cheat a little bit as well. You can use a potato masher to kind of squish them up a little bit in a pan if you're in a bit of a hurry. I've done that, that's okay. And then strain it through, ideally, some double-layered muslin cloth, because then what you're going to do is you're going to reduce the possibility of any seeds getting into your mixture, and you're going to get a really nice, purely liquid base left. And you can give it a really good squeeze as well. It's really quite satisfying squeezing elderberries, and it's quite synonymous with the herbal community that you know, it's that time of year when you're walking around with purple hands, really. It's quite fun. It's a good one to get kids involved with too. So you've got your purple liquid, and then you pop it back in a nice clean pan. So you've got this beautiful pure elderberry liquid, which then you can make into a syrup. Now you make it into a syrup to help to preserve it for the winter months, because usually what you're doing is you're making your elderberry syrup medicine to last you for the colder winter months. And there are a number of ways of doing it. You can make a really good elderberry syrup using concentrated apple juice, combining it with concentrated apple juice. You can use vegetable glycerin. Some people do it with honey, but you're going to need a fair bit of honey, so it depends on how much honey you've got available. Or you can do it the very, very simple way of combining it with sugar. So all of these things are going to help to preserve it and to stop it from developing a mold. And the ideal ratio for it is 1 part liquid to 1 part preservant, basically. So if you've got 200 mils of your lovely, beautiful, silky elderberry liquid, you would need 200 grams of sugar. I know that's pretty horrendous, but bear in mind that, you know, you're not eating it by the bowlful, you're just having a teaspoonful when you need it, basically. And then you add either the honey or the vegetable glycerin or the concentrated apple juice to your oh, that's my mouse, where are we? Here we are. To your elderberry juice in the pan. And it's if you're using sugar, it's quite an enthralling thing to watch, really. I just generally tend to sort of chuck all of my sugar in and then just watch it get eaten up by the lovely elderberry liquid. It's quite a mindful thing to watch, actually. There it goes. All getting swallowed up by the elderberry liquid. So whilst that's going in, what you then want to do is to heat it slowly. So as with anything that you're doing with a sugar or anything that's got a sugary base, you need to heat it slowly, slowly, slowly. And it's ready when it's either combined very well or when your sugar has completely dissolved. And what you're left with is a really gorgeous, really lovely, silky liquid that, in essence, is your winter medicine. Oh, one other thing I would say as well is if you're using any wooden cooking utensils, they will also turn purple. So have a special elderflower spoon. It's quite nice having a special elderflower spoon. It reminds you of your time of making elderflower. So that's your elderberry syrup, and then you let it cool. And once it's cool, you then pour it into sterile, either jars or sterile bottles. And then you make sure it's completely cool before you then pop the lid on it. And really importantly, label it so you remember what it is. Now, I'm just going to come out of the screen share now. And I'm going to show you some of the things that you can do with elderflower. So hi everyone, it's nice to see you all. So I'll stick with elderberry for the moment, just because that's what we were just covering. Now, because there's a certain amount of pectin that's in the elder, depending on how long you leave it on the hob for will depend on how solid it goes. Now, I ran out of elder this winter. So I had to call on the services of one of my students who had a bit more of a stash than me. And the one that she made, as you can see, there's not very much of it left now. It's almost like a jam. It's pretty solid. And that will keep really well, and it's not gone mouldy. So this was made last autumn. There is not an inch of mould on it. And in order to enhance the benefits for your respiratory system and your respiratory tract, what you can do is you can combine other elements that are really going to have a helpful effect. So you might want to add in lemon juice, bit of vitamin C, bit of a sort of a zingy, tangy kick. You might want to add in some ginger, which is really nice, really warming. It's going to get things moving and get the circulation going. You might want to add in some cinnamon. Again, if you're not quite so keen on the heat of ginger, cinnamon can sometimes be a little bit more pleasant. If you want to make it more aromatic, you could put cloves in it, but obviously cloves aren't for everyone. Some people like me really struggle with cloves. So there are so many things that you can add into your elderberry syrup or your elderberry jam or your elderberry rob, just to make it have a really, really lovely, really beautiful taste, and to help add to its medicinal benefit. The other thing you can do with elder as well, like with all of our medicinal preparations, is you can make a tincture from it. So a tincture is an extract of a herb that's been extracted in a combination of water and alcohol. And because water extracts some of the really beneficial constituents from medicinal plants, alcohol extracts sometimes slightly different ones, but also to a higher level. So an elderberry tincture that you could make with vodka, so by pouring vodka on top of washed berries and then letting that steep for a month with a lid in a nice dark place, and then you strain it off and preserve it. So that's another way of preserving your elder. Something else you can do that's really very pleasant is you can make an elderberry vinegar. So it's the same kind of process, but instead of using alcohol, you would extract them with, preferably apple cider vinegar is a good one to go for. And then you can take a teaspoon of that every day prophylactically to help you with your immune health. Now, we're talking about vinegars. Quite often with vinegars, you can use them for other purposes too. So you can use them as skin preparations, because vinegar is very, very good for the skin. And then if you really don't like it, you can use it to clean your bathroom tiles with, but definitely don't clean your bathroom tiles with elderberry vinegar, because it'll turn bad. So that's your berry. Then with your leaf, now admittedly this is one I picked yesterday afternoon, so it has gone really very floppy. So your elder leaf, you can just see the sort of little compound umbels there of the elderflower. Absolutely not out in this part of the world. But with the elder leaf, you've got that really beautiful, I really find it a very striking leaf. It's got this very definitive, very serrate edge, serrate margin to the leaf. And it just looks like it's just gonna cut through something. It's gonna cut through and really get to the bottom of that really horrible, nasty sort of catarrh and sinusitis that you can get. But with the leaf, when you pick the leaf, like I was saying earlier, if you're out and about and you've got a, something pesky has bitten you, scrunch up the leaf between your fingers and then rub it on the part of the skin that's been bitten. And you can do this as many times as you like, really. And so my arm has now turned a nice shade of light green, but that's fine because it will wash off. And then that will help to take down the swelling and certainly take down the itch as well. So it's a really helpful one to do for that. And then with the ointment or salve that I was telling you about, if you were to pick the leaves from the stem, so absolutely don't keep any of the stem when you're making a salve or ointment. And then once you've collected your leaves, chop them up fairly finely. And then, because there's going to be a water element to it, I would leave them, cover them up with a bit of kitchen roll or a tea towel or a bit of muslin cloth. Cover them up for about a day or a day or two, just so that some of the water content can evaporate off it. And then what you can do is pop them in a sterile jar. So this sterile jar thing is really key to getting good medicines, because they're not going to go, it's reducing the possibility of your preparation getting mouldy. Then pour on your oil. Now, theoretically, you can use any oil. Don't use vegetable oil, that's pretty nasty. But sunflower oil, olive oil, if you want to get really fancy, sweet almond oil, but it's expensive and it goes off pretty quick. So, so pop your oil and your herb together in a pan or a slow cooker, or if you've got a bain-marie or a porringer, you know, one of those pans that sits inside another pan. And then cook it very, very, very slowly and on a very, very low heat for about 2 or 3 hours. Let it cool. And then pop it in a nice sterile jar. And then let it sit there for a little bit. Because what you'll then find is that if you get a water fraction that's left on the top, you might be able just to pour off the water fraction or squeeze it off with a pipette. And then you've got your infused elder leaf, which you can then turn into a long-lasting ointment by combining it with a wax. So again, it's all about, this is where sort of herbal medicine and chemistry and cookery kind of cross here. It's about getting the amounts right. So remember when I was saying about the berry and it's 1 part liquid to 1 part sugary thing? With the ointments, what you want is 9 parts oil to 1 part wax. And that can be any wax. It can be beeswax, it can be candelilla wax, any of the vegan waxes work just as well. So if I've got 90 mils of oil, I'm going to use 10 grams of beeswax, and that isn't a lot. And either buy beeswax buttons or grate your beeswax, but don't use the same grater for your cheese as you're using to grate your beeswax, because you'll never get it clean, and your cheese will forever taste of beeswax, which is pretty yucky. And then you combine them together in a pan, let the two mix together on a low heat, and then you pour it into jars and then let it cool, and then that turns into a really solid salve that you can use for bruises and for sprains. For your elderflower, remember what I was saying about the fork? Your fork is your best friend with elder. Doesn't have to be a fancy fork, any kitchen fork will do. So what you're doing with your elderflower is you can either, to be honest, it's actually easier just to snip the flowers off when they're in flower, or you can kind of take that part really. And this is the part that when you're picking your elderflower or berry, you want to pick that section of it. But for the flower, just snip them off, or if you really want to be, completely perfectionist, you can fork them off the stem like that, and the same as you would do with a berry. And you can then make your elderflower cordial, and there's plenty of recipes all over the internet about how to make elderflower cordial. And you can dry it to keep for the rest of the year. So this is really beautiful, funny smelling, but kind of sweet, kind of bitter, dried elderflower. And again, you can make your elderflower tincture or your elderflower vinegars. So what I would really like to do now is have a look at the chat box and just have a look at some of the things that you've been popping in there, just to see what we can all share. And if anyone has any questions, do feel free to type them in, and I'll be really happy to answer them. So let's have a look through here. So quite a few of you have made elderflower cordial and elderflower champagne. Oh yeah, elderflower champagne didn't work. I've never made elderflower champagne, if I'm honest. It can be a bit of a tricky customer, that one, from what I've heard. So I don't think you're alone there at all.
Anna,
Um,
I've jotted down a few questions actually, if it helps you going through the chat.
Great. Yeah, go for it.
Liz asked, she said her sister is asthmatic. Will that help with the asthma? Would it help her sister?
It can. I mean, there are constitutionally, there are kind of different kinds of asthma. There's kind of wet asthma and a dry asthma. Where it would come into play would be if it was a really congested asthma that's very phlegmatic. So if it's that style of asthma, then yeah, it could certainly have a benefit there. Particularly the flowers there for sure.
And Eva asked, she said she's got a pink elderflower in her garden, and can these be used in the same way as the white elderflower?
That's a really good question, because with our plant life and our tree life, lots of different things have been crossbred to make kind of prettier varieties. So because all of the research has been done on the traditional varieties, so here we're talking about the true Sambucus nigra, I would always encourage people to use that sort of, the white creamy flowered elder rather than any others if that's possible. But do have a look around. It might be worth you comparing, maybe picking some of the pink elder and then comparing it with the smell of the white elder and see if it smells any difference. And then see how you go. But I would always say just try the traditional versions first. We kind of know how they work. But yeah, good question.
And we have a question. Pickling Peckham Facebook has some great recipes, so if people are interested in that. And the question here about Sambucus racemosa, is there any difference in the preparation?
To be honest, a lot of the elders have fairly common characteristics. I'll be honest, I don't specifically know particularly well the Sambucus racemosa, but it would be one to explore in terms of the botanical features, I think. But try and sort of go for the sort of true Sambucus nigra if you can. You can use the sort of the purple leaf varieties to some extent, but again, it's going down that route of all of the research and the sort of, the long-term historical use has always been on the traditional nigra. So it's the case of we don't really know enough about it. But that said, I know plenty of people who have particularly tried making a salve from the black elder leaves, and they have found it have quite the same effect.
Thank you, that's a great answer. And Philip is asking, what's the best way to sterilize jars and bottles?
Now, that's a really good question. Now, what I would encourage here, and there are a couple of ways of looking at it. Obviously, at the minute, we kind of need to be kind of careful about reusing things safely. But providing that you are sterilizing at high enough heat, you can very, very successfully sterilize glass implements, basically. So one of the easiest ways of doing it, if you're collecting glass jars and you're using that to keep keeping those to store your elder preparations in, what you need to do is firstly clean them really, really thoroughly, not an iota of anything left in them. Then pop them on a baking tray in the oven with just a tiny little bit of water in the bottom. And then heat them in the oven, ideally at a temperature of no less than 65 degrees C. Ideally 70 if the glass is going to be able to take it. And then that will sterilize your jars for you on a low heat over an hour. You can also use, and what I use actually, is I haven't got a baby, but I use a baby sterilizer. So to get this steam sterilization, if you happen to have an old baby sterilizer around the kitchen somewhere, you can use that quite successfully, so by steam. You can also obviously use sterilizing fluid. I tend to err away from that because sometimes it can leave a little bit of a funny tasting residue that I'm not particularly keen on, but you can absolutely use sterilizing fluid too.
Thank you, that's great. There's a question from Dan, Marion and Martha. In fact, a couple of questions from them. The first question is, what is a Rob preparation, please?
Okay, so elderberry syrup is just kind of elderberry in syrup form. Elderberry Rob has kind of a number of different descriptions really. Technically what it is, it's a combination of lots of different things in your elderberry preparation. So this is what I was talking about when you could be putting your ginger and your lemons and your cinnamon sticks and your cloves in. A Rob is essentially kind of what you want it to be, but it's heated on a low enough heat so that it becomes more solid than a syrup. So a little bit more like, that to be honest is more like a jam, but it has the same kind of effect. So it's much more of a solid preparation. But then what you do is you get a teaspoon of your elderberry Rob and you pop it in a cup, and then you boil up some hot water, and then you pour your hot water on your elderberry Rob and give it a really good stir. And then you drink that as a warm infusion, basically. And it's certainly one that during the winter months is really beautiful and a complete pleasure to drink and enjoy.
Great. And they were also asking, they said, I think you may have answered this already, but they have an elder with purple leaves and pink flowers. And they're saying, is this medicinal, please?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell. The simple answer to anything that's not the sort of, that very sort of classic sort of white flowered elder that we're used to seeing appear at this time of year is that there hasn't been the research done on it. No one's done the lab tests. We don't know what the chemical constituents are like. We don't know what it's been crossbred with. So always try to go for the white flowered variety where you can, unless you're making something from the leaves, by which point they're absolutely fine to use topically.
Great. And there's a couple of, Stevie said a good tip, you can freeze the berries on the stalks in bags and then shake them off once they're frozen and all the berries come off.
That's a fantastic suggestion. That's a really good suggestion.
Yeah, so thank you for that.
Thank you. The other thing you can do as well, of course, is that if you pick your berries, and I never pick all my berries from the same area, I might do a few bracts from one tree and a few bracts from maybe a couple of 100 yards down. Is that if you want to keep a little store for the emergencies. So, for example, I ran out of elder for my own personal use. Is that you can freeze the berries and leave them frozen until you want to use them, and that works equally as well. Yeah,
well, Carol, can you freeze it to preserve it instead of adding sugar?
Obviously, if you freeze a berry, it's going to preserve it anyway. But when you make your elder preparations, as soon as it's extracted, it's going to start degrading. So what either the honey or the sugar or the vegetable glycerin or the concentrated apple does is that it helps to stop it from spoiling, helps to stop it from moulding, and kind of reduce that possibility of it spoiling. And really good question I've just seen appear. I've got a food dryer, so if you've got a food dryer or a dehydrator, you absolutely can dehydrate the berries very successfully, and yeah, you can absolutely then rehydrate.
Great. We've got time for one more question, and then I think we're going to have to wrap up for the session. So I do have one that was from Becky, but is there anyone else that would like to put a question in the chat? But Becky was just asking, she said that she's heard that the elder has been over harvested. Is that something you're aware of, Hannah? And should we be concerned about that?
It is. Elderflower tea, cheers. We do have to be careful of it. It is a little bit of a bugbear of mine, if I'm honest, because some of the commercial manufacturers that make elderflower preparations pay people to basically, you can arrive at factories with a sack full of elderflowers. And to me, that is perpetuating a little bit of a sustainability problem. And we need to go cautiously. So we need to be very mindful of our local environment and what part the elder plays within that, so that we don't see what unfortunately has certainly been happening in my part of the world, of you seeing the elderflowers appear and then you go on a walk a week later and the whole hedge has been stripped, which is incredibly sad and incredibly irresponsible, because then that means that there's not going to be any berries at all in the autumn for the wildlife, which we really do need to give importance, because they need them as much as we do. So yeah, good question.
Thank you, Hannah. It's just a great session, and I think we have to wrap up now. We're out of time. So I hope if everyone wants to unmute themselves, and we can all clap our hands to say thank you to Hannah for such a great session.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you for some really great questions as well. It's always a help when essentially when people have so many good questions. So thank you so much for your questions, and I really hope you've enjoyed today. I will just pop up my very final slide very quickly, just to say that oops, let's go down to the bottom here, and here we go. Excellent. So there we go. So my name is Hannah Sylvester, as I've said. My business is called the District Herbalist, and it would be really great if you could keep in touch with me on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And I do also have a newsletter as well that I send out from my website. So thank you all so much for your time, and really enjoy interacting with Elder, and I hope that it brings you a lot of joy. Thank you.